Let's get into the stimulus. And the reason why I want to get into the stimulus is because of a conversation I had with a realtor yesterday, okay? So first, let me read off what we have. Obviously, American Rescue Plan, Biden's $1.9 trillion stimulus package. The $1.9 trillion stimulus package includes direct stimulus payments of $1,400 per person, extending unemployment compensation, raising the minimum wage, continuing eviction and foreclosure moratoriums, and increasing the child tax credit while making it refundable. It provides funds for the state and local governments to help compensate for lost tax revenue money for schools from kindergartens through 8th grade to safely reopen amidst the pandemic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, $1.9 trillion. That's $4 trillion in the last 2 years, right? In the last 12 months.
6.1 when you add it all up.
When you add it all
Post-COVID.
Yeah, some are saying...
Where are we getting the $6 trillion? Because I know the CARES Act was $2 trillion. This is potentially another $2 trillion.
$906 billion.
That was what?
January?
That was before Trump left office. Mm-hmm. So that's almost $5 trillion.
Well, and then there was other, expenditures still taking place. So say $5 to $6 trillion. Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm not questioning it. I'm just like trying to see where all these numbers are at.
And all of it pissed into the wind. By the way, none of it productive.
Danielle, I saw an article saying the fact that 20 to 40% of the currency ever printed in the history of America was printed in the last 12 months.
Just like that.
Just like that.
And we just assume that the dollar is going to maintain its hegemony, that it's going to maintain its reserve currency status. We take it for granted because we've had it for 100 years. So
what's going to happen? Because I hear two different schools of thought. And let me kind of give you both of them. One is, you got these, PE ratios that are just ridiculous. 1250 Tesla, okay? You got these Shiller PE ratios today that are indicating that, market's going to be facing
99th percentile.
That's pretty scary to be there. You got interest rates, went up a little bit, which is good to see that taking place a little bit, went up, and you and I were kind of going, seeing if you want it, if you don't want it. But a guy yesterday, the real estate guy, I'm talking to this guy. He is the seller's real estate agent. Obviously, he's not representing me.
And it is a seller's market.
It is a seller's market today in Florida, and it's ridiculous. So he says, let me tell you why I need to buy this house and why this value of this land is going to double in the next 3 to 5 years. I said, tell me why. He says, because that $1.9 trillion they put into the economy, that's $4 trillion last 12 months. He says, inflation's going to the roof, and the value of things that cannot be duplicated is going to go to the roof, such as land, okay? So he's not selling hard assets, he's saying land. So, we talk about land, gold, baseball cards, all this other stuff that's going to the roof. Is this going to make the economy and Dow go to 40, 50, 60,000? Or is this eventually going to get America? Because it seems like we're on a run rate. I know this whole thing about 128 months that we had economic expansion, COVID disrupted it. We're back at it again. So if you take COVID out, it could have been a 140-month economic expansion that we have. What is going to happen with all this money we're printing?
We were going into recession anyways in 2020. The Federal Reserve needed an excuse to print money. You've never had a year where you have global trade, world trade, contract for a 12-month solid without the global economy going into recession. That was 2019. We were headed there anyways. The Fed needed an excuse to bail out the bond market, and it got it with COVID. It needed a black swan event, and it got it. So that's the one thing that people need to understand is this was not, the slowdown that we had was not catalyzed by COVID. It wasn't. COVID was needed for the Fed to come in with their printing press. And the Fed got it. They needed the excuse. There was all this repo madness. Go back and look at the end of 2019 when the Fed was doing not QE because there were issues with overnight lending in America. I mean, this is all in the weeds and wonky, but it was happening, that there was real disruption in the overnight markets, and the Fed needed an excuse to start pumping huge amounts of money into the economy, and it got it. It got it with COVID. And that's why we are where we are today, because of the printing press. But you cannot have sustained inflation with 19 million Americans collecting unemployment benefits. You can't. You can have a massive inflation scare, and that's going to benefit your real estate, not your real estate agent, but the seller's real estate agent. Mm-hmm. That's going to benefit them because it's a great narrative. It's fantastic, but it won't be sustained. Not until you get these people to work.
Okay, so what does that mean, though? It won't be sustained. Okay, let's get them back to work. People eventually go back to work. You remember when Barack Obama said unemployment benefits 6 months? No, 12 months. No, 24 months.
Well, this new stimulus package pushes it out to September.
Sure, but eventually people are going to go back to work. They're going to have to go back to work.
And
I know 3.5 million people you're saying fully lost, like permanently.
Permanent job losses.
Right,
are
3.5 million.
at recessionary levels.
Okay, but what I'm saying to you is, like, look, if you and I go out there and keep raising debt, okay, we keep getting credit cards, and we get more credit cards, and more credit. That's what America's doing.
We've been doing it for years.
Yeah, but at this level, but how come a massive, ridiculous crash hasn't yet hit? What is the key indicator for that to be taking place?
There's no replacement for the dollar. The euro's a joke. Italy's a mess. They never, after we had the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009, our banks were forced to clean up their balance sheets, get rid of the bad debts. That didn't happen in Europe. Japan's, sorry, goodbye. So there's no replacement for the dollar until China gets to be bigger. And because of COVID and how we've approached stimulus spending versus how China has approached stimulus spending, it was going to be 2030 that China was the largest economy in the world. Now it's 2028. If their currency continues to appreciate versus the dollar, it'll be 2026, 5 years from now, that China is the bigger economy. And then we'll have a separate discussion about what's going to replace the dollar. And then your real estate agent, seller guy, he's going to be right then.
Okay, my timeline is 2025. What's your timeline?
For China?
No, my timeline for the market to have a massive collapse, like we're going to feel the pain, I have 2025. What are you thinking?
Once the recognition is out there that we're not going to be the global economic superpower, it's game over. That's going to take a few years to happen.
Unpack game over.
Yeah, what does it mean, game over?
Well, we benefit because we can borrow at such low cost because we're the global reserve currency. So you have all of the liberals in Congress saying it is a free lunch. We can borrow as much as we want. 1.9 trillion today. We can have $5 trillion, $7 trillion deficits every year. There's never going to be consequences for the amount of debt we're taking on. And that works until it stops working.
But you have people like Janet Yellen and Jerome Powell who I wouldn't. So like I know you have strong feelings on that.
Hashtag J&J.
So, but they're championing.
Of course they are.
All this
We've had
stimulus.
40 years of falling interest rates. It's all they seem to think can possibly happen. But they're not studying history. They're not studying the fact that Great Britain lost the pound as British pound sterling lost its reserve currency status because Great Britain took on too much debt. So if you start to think that the rules don't apply after 100 years or so, and it's been 100 years.
Let me follow up with that. Speaking of studying history, so we're familiar what happened 100 years ago. World War I, Spanish flu, roaring 20s, rocking and rolling, prohibition, people are sneaking drinks, boom. 1929, I think it was October, was the start of the Great Depression, right, which lasted all the way to the 1930s. So speaking of history and history repeating itself, you're predicting 1928 potentially, 1925 potentially. Are
2025, 2025.
I'm sorry, 2025, 2028. Are we essentially saying that that's potentially what we're in line for, is another Great Depression, worse than certainly COVID or
I'm
the
not so
Great
sure that we
Recession?
have a whole decade in front of us. This is not a repeat of the roaring 20s. If you look back at the price to earnings ratio, in December of 1920, it was 4.8. Okay. I'm going to make this really simple.
Yeah.
It was 4.8 in December of 1920. 100 years later, in December of 2020, it was 7 times that level.
Say that one more time.
Stocks were 7 times more expensive coming into 2021 than they were going into 1921. 7 times more expensive. Okay. So you can't convince me that we're at the precipice of a roaring decade for the U.S. economy.
What do you mean stocks are 7 times more expensive?
The price to earnings ratio, the Cape Shiller that looks back over was 4.8 times earnings in December 1920. It was 7 times that level in December of 2020.
Yeah. That's a concern. So for me, I trust math more than I trust enthusiasm.
Well, then you trust what I just said. 7 times more expensive.
That's exactly where I'm at. I'm at the math side. I trust math, right? When it comes down to things like this, math is going to tell you what the future is going to look like. You just have to look at the right math, right? But the part I think about is the following. So World War I, when Germany had the debt that they had to pay off with the reparations, they're like, dude, we don't have this kind of money to pay us. So they went quietly behind closed doors, and what do? They started printing money to pay off the debt. They paid it off, but hyperinflation took Germany to crazy levels, and then, boom, it took them a while to recover from it. Why are so many brilliant minds in finance so optimistic about the direction the economy is going? Why are they so optimistic?
You got to talk your book.
You're saying they're trying to sell a book? Is that
no,
what
you
mean?
have to. Your book of business. You have to.
Okay.
I mean, it's their jobs to pump up the market. It's their jobs to keep people invested in the stock market. It's their jobs to say, for the long haul, you're always going to get paid off.
What's your level of trust for Jerome Powell and or Janet Yellen? Your level of trust. 10 out of 10 is they're the best. I love them. 1 is I wouldn't trust them.
All right, so I'm going to send you a copy of a book called Fed Up.
Okay, what you wrote. I'm familiar with this.
It's got Janet's words in it.
Okay.
Okay.
What are you saying?
But for the people that haven't read the book.
She's a UC Berkeley educated labor economist who's in charge of the biggest economy in the world, who doesn't understand the financial system like she should. And she is in a place where she can finally lay the groundwork to policy in the United States not benefiting the top 1%, but benefiting everybody, which will ignite inflation like you've never seen.
That's a bad thing?
It's the idea of helicopter money. It's the idea of getting money directly to the people, as opposed to saying there'll be a trickle-down effect. If we make lending easier, if we make borrowing costs lower, then companies are going to borrow and spend and hire. That has not worked. Instead, they bought back their shares. And
$42 billion.
You've seen the financialization of America, which is non-productive. It does not create jobs. So Janet Yellen is bitter that she was at the head of the Fed when this wealth effect, when wealth inequality was widening. If she has the power now to reopen the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 to allow for direct deposits to the people. There's no Wall Street in between. There's no intermediary. You're going to get money directly to the people. And you want inflation, you'll get inflation then.
So, by the way, it was $25 billion that Berkshire Hathaway bought back of their shares, but
because there's nothing to buy. It's your map. It's too expensive.
Yeah. Well, it's also banking on yourself. Like, we're going to.
But you know where the value is.
Yeah, you know where the value is. Yeah, I don't know. To me, I.
And that was the most disappointing letter. Warren Buffett. I mean, he's 90. I get it, but he didn't take a stand on anything controversial. It was a wah-wah. Seriously.
America's the best. Bet on America.
Bet on America.
Fixed income is this.
You're coming out of the most controversial presidential election. Your murder rate's going through the roof. The country's clearly in a crisis mode, and you say nothing about what the ills of the country when you have.
What would you expect him to say? Like, what would you want to hear from him?
A generation ago, he said that share buybacks were weapons of mass destruction. Excuse me, derivatives were weapons of mass destruction, and he derided share buybacks in his prior life because he was like, if you've got a bunch of people's money and you can't put it to work and make investments and grow their money, then what are you doing in business? That was his attitude about share buybacks years ago. And he took a stand in saying that derivatives were weapons of mass destruction. He didn't say anything that was like, wow, controversial. Nothing. He was like, Apple's great. Well, no shit. Sorry. I mean, we all have it, right? Apple. But he didn't. It was very disappointing.
What about Elizabeth Warren and her thoughts?
Well, no. Let's stay on this. Let's stay on this. I don't want to get away from this because this, to me, when we're talking economy and maths, so you're saying you're gonna get what you're gonna get, which is inflation. Like you just said that before we went.
But you have to have a crisis. You can't just willy-nilly reopen the Federal Reserve Act. You have to have something happen to where there's Nomura, big bank out of Japan, said that every 20 cents of the dollar that's printed of stimulus goes into the economy. In other words, 80% doesn't. They were saying that the multiplier effect of stimulus spending is crashing. We know that 53% of the last stimulus bill was saved. So what good does it do to spend all of this money if it's not being injected into the economy, if it's not creating jobs? And that, I think, is where the Democrats are really, really missing the message, because they say they want to do infrastructure spending. They say that there's another bill coming, but they're ramming this all through with reconciliation. There's not a single person in the GOP, much to say nothing of moderate Democrats who are on board with what they're doing. So they're going to burn every damn bridge before they get to true stimulus spending that creates jobs. I mean, you could fall into a damn pothole in New York City if you're in a small car and be lost forever. There's bridges that are collapsing. And you've got high-speed railways in China that go zillions of miles an hour, and they're in the middle of constructing 30 airports and getting ready to eat the United States' lunch, and we can't even pass fiscal spending that creates jobs and repairs our infrastructure. I mean, FDR wrote the book. I'm no huge FDR fan, but it was a public-private partnership, and it created generations, plural, of productivity and job creation. And we're giving people money to not work? Whoa. Hashtag winning.
At a 7% unemployment, though. At a 7% unemployment. We're not talking about at 11%, 10%, at 7% unemployment. We've had 7% many different times.
We have, and it's not a bad level. It's 6.3, and that's all good and well, but that's because so many people have left the workforce. So that's your math.
Right.
If you've got people who've given up, that's why you have a 6.3% unemployment rate, but still 19 million Americans collecting unemployment benefits. And that's why you've got this stimulus spending, is just to kind of we're going to have the best economic growth in America in 2021 since 1983. It'll be 5-6% GDP. We're going to have a blockbuster year.
That's what they've been projecting, 6% GDP.
You can't jam $2 trillion into the economy and not expect GDP to grow. It's going to grow.
Okay, so then,
but it's not going to create jobs. So you're going to come out at the other end of it going, oh, God, we need more stimulus spending, and more yet, and more yet. And so you're going to get the Stephanie Keltons of the world all excited.
So you don't think this 1.9 is the last 1.9 we're doing the next 2-3 years?
No.
So you think there's more 1.9s coming up?
At least $1 trillion infrastructure bill, right?
$1 trillion?
No. I'm talking
$1 trillion doesn't even address. I mean, look, there's $2-3 trillion just to do the repairs. Just to do the repairs. I'm not talking about modernization. I'm talking about repairs. And
then potential green energy bill, right?
Oh, God help me.
Well, let's still stay on this, because here's my thought. So Dow's right now at what? 30 what? 31?
31.
Okay, so let's say it's at 31. If it's going to be a 6% GDP, and if you don't think things are going to turn around in the next, 3-4 years, say 2025, 2026, when China, whose plan they came up with, made in China 2025, their plan was to be the #1 superpower by 2025. They're on track to be that by 2025, 2026. Where do you see Dow going the next 12, 24 months? Do you see it going to 40, 50, 60?
That I don't do.
Are you optimistic it's going to be going?
I think that liquidity,
the way it's going, it's going to go higher.
I think we have a correction in front of us that we're in the midst of right now. And between the money printing that we have to come, the liquidity that's going to be injected in the economy, you could certainly see a correction and then another run up, another melt up.
I don't see this slowing down the next couple of years.
Well, you said you don't see this happening.
But that's just liquidity. You're just talking about you can't have a drought if it doesn't stop raining. And the Fed's going to keep printing money as long as we have license to do so, because we have King Dollar, which has been weaponized.
It's actually a great analogy. Can't have a drought if it keeps raining. They're making it rain.
They're making it rain. They're printing
straight
money.
Up. They're at the club making it rain.
You've got Janet Yellen in the house. I mean, the rainmaking is not going to stop.
Economist.
DJ Janet Yellen,
Labor
making it rain.
Even worse.
I mean, she would when she was the chair of the Fed, and she would go in front of Congress and do her testimony, and they would ask her about financial regulation. Her eyeballs would roll into the back of her head. She was so bored. I'm sorry, but Steve Mnuchin was a master at what he did. And
You're a Mnuchin fan.
I'm not saying I'm a Mnuchin fan. I'm saying he understood his job, and he understood the plumbing of the financial system, and he understood what needed to keep the wheels on the bus and keep it going. That's not Janet Yellen.
But what about Jerome Powell? I know you've been pretty outspoken about Janet Yellen. What are your thoughts on Jerome Powell?
I mean, look, his net worth is somewhere between $100 and $150 million. I think he's done.
Wow.
Done? February 2022, his term is up, and the woman who donated to Hillary Clinton, Lael Brainerd, is poised to rise.
That's who you think is going to be the next chairman of the Fed, chairwoman of the Fed?
I think so.
Wow, we got a prediction here.
By the way, if you're enjoying the podcast so far, smash that subscribe button. Yimi Moreno, thank you for the $100 you just gave to the podcast. So now, short sellers and Elon Musk. Last week we talked about, I asked a question from Adam and Tom. I said, who's next to be permanently banned from Twitter that's like Trump? You got Trump personality permanently banned from Twitter. And I brought up Elon Musk because, some of the stuff he talks about, hey,
he's very influential.
Very, very influential. He's got look what he did to Bitcoin, then he plays with Bitcoin. Look what he does with short. He's just playing nonstop, right? So is what he's doing okay? Is what he's doing with Twitter, is he that brilliant where he's not crossing the line and he's just playing games with the market to show how much influence he has?
Well, if it was Elon Musk in a vacuum, maybe so. But he's the Pied Piper. So he has plenty of people following every move he makes. Mm-hmm. So you can't say Bitcoin's the next it girl and then a few days later be like, just kidding. You're toying with small investors. And speaking of Elizabeth Warren, and you've got Gary Gensler coming in the Securities and Exchange Commission, and he's looking into these influential type of voices. So, but I'm going to push back for just 2 seconds and say it was a bad line that was crossed when they took Donald Trump off Twitter. It just was. It set a bad precedent because now we can have these conversations about who's next. And that's not what free speech is all about. It's not.
So you're for Trump staying on?
I think that the precedent that was set is a bad thing. It's kind of like the Democrats saying, kind of like AOC, God love her, saying we need to get rid of the filibuster. It's like, well, wait a minute. If the midterms flip the House and the Senate in 2022, which is perfectly viable, and you got rid of the filibuster, how are you going to like that then? So you need to watch what you do because you're setting the next generation of precedent when you do it. And it could come back to bite you in the ass.
So if you enjoyed this little short segment from the podcast that we did, here's another short segment to watch. Or if you want to see the entire podcast, click over here. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.